There is a man hiding in a basement in Seoul. He has been there for 4.5 years. He has not seen sunlight. He survives on food smuggled to him by his wife. He has built a small shrine on the wall and placed a photograph of the man who owns the house directly above him at the center of it. The man upstairs has never once thought about him. That image is not a metaphor. It is the entire argument of Parasite compressed into one room. This film did not win the Palme d'Or and 4 Academy Awards because it told a clever story about a rich family and a poor family in Seoul. It won because every country on earth has a basement and a hill, and a line between them that runs one way. And Bong Joon-ho spent 2 hours and 12 minutes showing exactly how that line gets built, who maintains it, and what it costs the people who were put on the wrong side of it, before they were old enough to know a line existed. Welcome to Serial Seoul. Let's get into it. Section 1. The house that capitalism built. There is a window in the Kim family's apartment that sits at ankle level, right at the point where a sidewalk meets a wall. The window is so low that when someone walks by outside, you can see their shoes, their ankles, sometimes the bottom of their shopping bags. That is the view. That is what the world looks like from where the Kims live. Not the sky, not the street, the shoes of people walking past. Bong Joon-ho spent more time on that window than most directors spend on their entire opening sequences. He came back to it again and again throughout the film. And the reason he kept coming back is because that window is not a window. It is a measuring stick, a way of showing, without a single word of dialogue, exactly where this family sits in relation to every other human being in the city they live in. The apartment is called a banjiha. The word means half underground. And the thing most people outside South Korea do not know when they watch this film is that banjiha apartments are not a metaphor Bong invented to make a point. They are a real type of housing. Hundreds of thousands of real people live in them. They have a history that goes back decades, and that history is not about architecture. It is about war and government decisions, and a city that kept growing faster than anyone knew how to house the people pouring into it. In the 1970s, the South Korean government made a decision that seemed practical at the time. Every new low-rise building in the country was required to include a basement. The reason had nothing to do with housing. South Korea and North Korea had been at war 2 decades earlier, and the threat of another conflict never fully went away. The government wanted every building to have a space where people could shelter if the bombs started falling again. These were meant to be bunkers, storage rooms, emergency spaces. Nobody was supposed to live in them. Then Seoul started growing. Through the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s, people came to Seoul from all across the country looking for work. The city filled up fast. Housing prices went up. Affordable places to rent became harder and harder to find. And the basement spaces that had been built as bomb shelters started looking very attractive to landlords who needed to rent something, and to families who needed somewhere they could actually afford. People started moving into them, even though living there was technically illegal. Then, in 1984, the government changed the law. They made it legal to live in a banjiha. Not because the conditions were good, not because anyone thought these were real homes, but because the housing crisis was bad enough that the government decided to accept what was already happening rather than fix the underlying problem. That is the actual origin story of the home where the Kim family lives in Parasite. A bomb shelter that became a home because the city had too many people and not enough places to put them. And because it was easier to legalize the problem than to solve it. By the time Bong was making Parasite, roughly 383,000 semi-basement apartments existed in South Korea, with almost 60% of them concentrated in Seoul. The people living in them were not a random cross-section of the population. Around 78% of Banjiha residents came from the bottom 30% of income earners in the country. These were not homes people chose because they liked them. They were homes people landed in because there was nowhere else they could afford to go. The Kim family in the film are folding pizza boxes for money. They are hunting for Wi-Fi signals from a neighbor's router by pressing their phones against the ceiling of their apartment. They have to climb up on the toilet to reach the one small window where they get signal. These details are not there to be funny, though they are funny. They are there because they are true. This is what financial desperation actually looks like in a modern city. Not dramatic hunger or obvious suffering, but the constant small indignities of trying to survive in a place not built for you, using resources not meant for you, staying invisible to people who would prefer not to think about you. The opening scene also shows a fumigation truck outside, spraying pesticide on the neighboring buildings. The father of the family, Ki-taek, sees it coming, and instead of closing the window, he tells his daughter to leave it open. They will get free fumigation, he figures. There is something almost mathematical about his logic. Every resource that exists in the world around him but was not designed for him needs to be redirected. Wi-Fi, pesticide, opportunities. Every single thing in their lives is accessed sideways because the direct route is not available to people in their position. The Parks live on a hill. This is not a small detail in the geography of the film. The architecture of Seoul, like the architecture of most cities that have been around long enough, has a vertical relationship with money. Higher up means more expensive, more sunlight, more space, more distance from the street and the noise and the people at the bottom. The Parks live in a house designed by a famous architect, with a garden and glass walls that look out onto green space. Their windows face sky and trees. The Kim's window faces shoes. Bong has talked directly about the importance of elevation in the film. The staircases were not set decoration. Every time someone in the Kim family ascends toward the Park household, they are physically moving upward through the class system. Every time they retreat back to their own lives, they are walking down. The city itself has been designed so that wealth goes up and poverty goes down. And the film makes this visible by never letting you forget which direction everyone is moving. The Park house sits above a long, steep set of stairs. When Ki-woo first walks up those stairs toward the Park home, the camera takes its time with the climb. You feel the distance between where he started and where he is going. And the film will return to those stairs at the worst possible moment, during the flooding sequence, when the Kims are running down them in the rain. Everything they gained in the Park house ripped away. Water coming in from above and below, simultaneously. The flooding is worth staying with for a moment because it is the scene where the film stops being a heist story and becomes something else entirely. The Kims have spent a night in the Park house while the Parks are away camping. They have eaten the Park's food, drunk the Park's whiskey, sat in the Park's furniture, and for a few hours experienced what it feels like to have space and light and the kind of comfort that comes from knowing the walls around you are solid. Then the Parks come home early because of the rain, and the Kims have to scatter. They barely make it out. And when they finally get back to their own apartment, the sewer water is already coming up through the drain. The toilet overflows. The Banjiha, which sits below street level, is flooding from the bottom up, because that is what happens when a city gets heavy rain and the drainage system struggles, and the lowest lying homes take the water that has nowhere else to go. By the time the Kims make it into their apartment, it is nearly submerged. They are grabbing what they can. The daughter finds cigarettes floating past her. The father is up to his chest in sewer water, trying to drag out bags. Everything that was already barely enough is now destroyed. They spend the night in a gymnasium with hundreds of other families who were also flooded out. And here is where the film makes its most quiet and devastating observation. The Parks call in the morning. They need help setting up for a birthday party. Can the Kims come? And the Kims say yes, because they have to. Because their apartment is underwater, and their daughter is dead by the end of the next day, and their son will have brain damage. And the only constant throughout all of it is that the Parks need things, and the Kims are the ones who have to provide them. This is not a fictional situation that Bong constructed as a worst-case scenario. In August 2022, 3 years after the film came out, the heaviest rainfall Seoul had seen in over 100 years hit the city. A family of 3 was trapped in their Banjiha apartment. A woman in her 40s, her sister who had a developmental disability, and the sister's 13-year-old daughter. The water pressure outside was so strong that a neighbor who tried to help could not get their window open from the outside. The family drowned. Trapped underground by water, unable to get out, in a home they lived in because it was what they could afford. After this happened, the Seoul city government announced it would eventually ban residential use of basements and semi-basements, and would give existing Banjiha owners 20 years to convert the spaces into storage or parking. 20 years. Not immediately, not urgently. 20 years. The city also came under scrutiny because it had reduced its flood control budget by more than 15% that same year. A student who lived in a Banjiha in one of the affected districts described his experience trying to get home during the storm. He said the water was thigh-high in the streets. He was 46 kilos. He said he was afraid the current would sweep him away. When he got home, every apartment on his floor was flooded. He said afterward, "We know living here is dangerous. But people like us have no choice because we have no money. If Banjihas did not exist, housing would be more expensive, and we would have no place to live." The problem is the reality of a society where this type of housing exists, and there is no choice but to live there. That is not a line from Parasite. That is a real person describing real conditions in the real Seoul. 3 years after a film about a fictional family in a fictional Banjiha showed the world exactly this. The film opens on that ankle-level window, not just because it is a good visual. The question Bong is asking from the very first frame is a spatial one. Where do you sit in relation to everything else? How high up are you? And who decided that? The Kims did not end up underground because of bad decisions or personal failure or lack of effort. The city they live in was built in a specific way, over decades, through specific government choices, economic forces, and a housing market that prices people out and down until the only available space is literal. The Banjiha is the physical shape that inequality takes in Seoul, not a symbol of it, the thing itself. Bong once noted that when he worked as a private tutor for a wealthy Seoul family in his early 20s, he had the feeling of infiltrating someone else's life. That feeling of being present in a world you do not belong to, of performing a version of yourself that makes you acceptable to people who would not otherwise let you in, became the seed of this film. The house at the top of the hill and the apartment at the bottom of the stairs are not just 2 different addresses. They are 2 different countries that happen to share the same city. The Parks are not cruel people. That is actually the point. They are generous, they are polite, they are pleasant to work for. They pay on time, they do not shout. "Mister?" Park even tells Ki-taek at one point that he likes him because he does not overstep, does not get familiar, does not cross an invisible line that Mr. Park has never had to articulate, because nobody in Ki-taek's position has ever made him articulate it before. That line is the thing the entire film is orbiting. Not cruelty, not villainy. A line that nobody drew, but everybody knows is there. That the rich do not have to think about, and the poor cannot stop thinking about. And the fact that Mr. Park is a reasonable man who would be genuinely baffled to be called a bad person is not a contradiction to the film's argument. It is the argument. The house was built on top of the people at the bottom. In this film, that is structural fact. There is a whole other family living in the basement of the Park house, and the Parks have no idea. And before the film is done, everyone in that basement is going to come upstairs. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The section that follows is about the people who built themselves into the walls of that house long before the Kims ever walked through the front gate. About what it means to live so far below the surface that you stop being a person to the people above you and become, instead, a ghost in their foundation. Section 2. The Ghost in the Foundation. The Park house has a secret. Not the kind of secret that gets revealed slowly through hints and clues. The kind that gets revealed all at once, in a single scene, through a door in the basement that nobody who lives in the house knows exists. Behind that door is a staircase. At the bottom of that staircase is a man who has been living underground for 4.5 years. His name is Oh Gun-se. He is the husband of Moon Gwang, the housekeeper who worked in the Park house before the Kims got her fired. He is hiding from loan sharks. He has been down there in the dark, surviving on food his wife smuggles to him, sleeping on a cot, keeping a shrine on the wall with a photograph of Mr. Park at the center of it. He has not seen sunlight in years. The Parks, living directly above him, have never once suspected he was there. When this is revealed partway through the film, it lands like a trap door opening beneath the audience. Everything that felt like a simple story about one poor family and one rich family suddenly has a third layer. And that third layer changes what the film is actually saying. Because Gun-se is not a plot twist. He is an argument. He is what happens when someone falls far enough through the cracks of a system that they disappear completely. And the people living on top of the crack never even notice the fall. The house itself was designed by an architect named Nam Gum, who built the bunker and kept it off the blueprints. He told no one. When he sold the house to the Parks, they had no idea a secret underground space existed beneath their home. The previous housekeeper, Moon Gwang, found out about it because she came with the house. She had worked there under the architect. She knew the space was there, and when her husband ran out of options, she put him in it. The bunker was originally built for the same reason all South Korean buildings of that era had basements: fear of North Korea, fear of attack, fear of the bombs that might come one day. The rich family that could afford a house like this had enough money to build a deeper, more private version of that fear into the foundation. While Banjiha apartments were the government's answer to the housing crisis for poor families, the private bunker was the wealthy architect's answer to his own possible future ruin. Both are underground. Both are hidden from the world above. One is where the poor are put. The other is where the rich plan to go if things ever get bad enough. Gun-se ended up in the rich man's emergency space because he had run out of road everywhere else. Before he went underground, Gunse had tried to build something for himself. He had owned a Taiwanese castella shop. Castella is a type of sponge cake, and in the mid-2000s, these shops were briefly everywhere in South Korea. They were a food trend, the kind that burns bright and then collapses almost immediately when the next trend comes along. Gunse had bet on it. He had taken out loans to fund the shop. The trend died. The shop failed. The debt stayed. The loan sharks came. And with nowhere else to go and no way to pay what he owed, he went into the basement and he stayed there. Ki-taek, the Kim family father, had also tried to run a business that failed. He had invested in a Taiwanese castella shop as well. The same trend, the same collapse, the same outcome minus the loan sharks. This detail, which the film drops quietly without drawing attention to it, is one of the most precise things Bong does in the entire movie. These two men, one of whom ends up murdering a rich man, and one of whom ends up buried in the same basement as the first, made the same bet on the same opportunity, and lost the same way. They are not opposites. They are the same person at different points in the same downward path. When the Kims discover Gunse in the basement, Ki-taek looks around at the squalor and asks how anyone could live like that. The question carries real disgust in it. And then later, after the birthday party massacre, after everything has collapsed, Ki-taek himself goes into that same basement and stays there. He buries Moon Gwang in the garden. He raids the kitchen at night for food. He sends Morse code messages through the basement light, hoping his son will see them from outside. He becomes exactly what he looked at with disgust. And the film does not comment on this. It does not slow down to make sure the audience registers the irony. It just happens, and the camera records it without judgment, and the audience is left to sit with the fact that the distance between a man who asks how anyone could live like this and a man who lives like this turned out to be one very bad afternoon. Gunse's existence in the basement works on several levels at once, and the most important one is the simplest. The Parks are wealthy enough to build protection against their worst possible future. They have a bunker beneath their house for when things go wrong. The Kims are not wealthy enough to have any protection at all. When things go wrong for them, the sewage comes up through the toilet and fills the apartment while they sleep. When things go catastrophically wrong, they end up underground, in someone else's emergency room, which was itself borrowed from a man who had nowhere else to go. The bunker is the rich man's safety net, made concrete and literal. And the people who end up living in it are the people for whom no safety net exists. Moon Gwang is also worth thinking about carefully here, because her position in the film is easy to misread. She gets fired by the Kims, who need her gone so they can install Ki-taek's wife Chung-suk as the new housekeeper. The Kims manufacture a story about a peach allergy to get rid of her. It works. She is let go. And then she comes back because her husband is trapped in the basement with no one to bring him food. What she wants is simple. She wants Chung-suk to allow Gunse to keep living in the basement in exchange for money. She is not trying to destroy the Kims. She is trying to keep her husband alive. The Kims, having just displaced her from her job, are now the obstacle between her husband and survival. And because neither family has any structural power over their own situation, the conflict between them becomes brutal and personal in a way that has nothing to do with actual hatred, and everything to do with two drowning people grabbing for the same piece of driftwood. Bong said in an interview with Empire magazine that there are no true villains in Parasite. Every main character has qualities that make them understandable and qualities that make them hard to defend. Moonguang is introduced as an obstacle and ends up being someone whose entire situation is a direct result of decisions made by people above her in ways she never controlled. She worked for the architect who built the secret bunker. She kept his secret. She used the space to protect her husband when he had nowhere to go. She is destroyed not by the Parks, who never even knew she existed in that way, but by the Kims, who needed her position more than she could afford to hold on to it. The lower-class families in this film do not unite. They do not recognize each other as people in the same situation and work together. The Kims look at Gun-se with contempt. They see someone who has sunk lower than them and feel, momentarily, better about where they stand. This is one of the most honest things the film does. Solidarity between people in difficult circumstances is not automatic. Often, the opposite happens. People who are struggling measure themselves against the people just below them as a way of maintaining some sense of worth. Because looking upward at the distance to the top is too discouraging, and looking sideways at everyone in the same position confirms what they are afraid is true about their own lives. The Kims are not bad people for doing this. They are doing what people do when the system they live inside offers no real collective path out and makes individual survival feel like the only game available. The film does not excuse the contempt, but it explains exactly where it comes from and why it makes sense in the world these characters inhabit. There is a moment when Gun-se, after years underground, hears through the bunker's ceiling that Mr. Park has come home. He immediately drops to his knees. He presses his hands together. He bows his head in the direction of the floor above him, which is where Mr. Park is walking around without any awareness that a man below him is treating him like a god. Gun-se has built a shrine with Mr. Park's photograph at the center of it. He has survived underground for years by directing his gratitude and his hope upward toward a man who has never once thought about him. This is not presented as pathetic. The film watches it with something closer to tragedy. Gun-se is not deluded about Mr. Park in particular. He has simply been underground long enough that the person he associates with warmth and light and safety is the man whose house provides the only shelter he has. The worship makes perfect psychological sense given the conditions. And the fact that Mr. Park would be horrified to know about it, would feel genuinely uncomfortable with that level of devotion from a stranger in his basement, does not make the devotion less real. It makes the distance between the two men more absolute. The birthday party sequence is where the basement comes upstairs and refuses to go back down. Da-song, the Park's young son, is having his birthday celebrated in the garden. The Parks have rented a tent and set up a party with fancy food. The older Kims are working. The younger Kims have been invited as guests. Everything is operating on the surface level of normal. Then Ki-woo goes into the basement with the Scholar's Stone, intending to deal with Gun-se. And Gun-se deals with him first. Bludgeons him with the stone. Walks upstairs. Stabs Ki-jung, the Kim daughter, in front of the birthday guests. Da-song, who had seen Gun-se before and been told it was a ghost, faints from shock. Chung-suk kills Gun-se with a barbecue skewer. Ki-taek watches Mr. Park react to Gun-se's smell with undisguised disgust in the middle of everything, even as Ki-jung is bleeding out in front of him. And Ki-taek reaches his limit. He takes the knife. He kills Mr. Park. He runs. The violence at the birthday party is not random. It is the accumulated weight of everything the film has been building. Gun-se spent 4.5 years underground, being kept alive by a woman, who then got pushed back underground by a family trying to survive. And his explosion into the sunlit birthday party is what happens when the people the system puts underground decide they have nothing left to lose. Keytek's murder of Mr. Park is what happens when a man who has swallowed his own dignity for long enough hears the person he works for respond to a dying smell with personal offense. The basement does not stay in the basement. That is what the second half of the film is about. And what Bong is saying with the structure of the house, with the bunker, with Gunsei bowing to the floor above him and then emerging from that floor covered in years of underground living, is that the thing a system pushes down does not disappear. The pressure builds, and eventually, it finds a way back up. Keytek ends up exactly where Gunsei was, in the bunker, alone, sending messages in the dark to a son who is trying to figure out how to get him out. The film ends before that happens. Ki-woo writes his father a letter describing how one day he will earn enough money to buy the house and walk down the stairs to free him. The letter is a fantasy. The film shows it to the audience as a fantasy, cutting from Ki-woo's imagined version of the reunion to the reality of him still living in the same semi-basement apartment with his mother. The scholar's stone, placed at the bottom of a river. The house above him, exactly as unreachable as it was at the beginning. The man in the basement sends messages every day. The son sees them and cannot answer. The house stands on the hill, sold to a new family who know nothing about what happened in it or beneath it. And the people underground keep sending signals upward into a world that has no particular reason to look down and notice them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the film has not yet shown, at this point in its argument, is how the surface of that world is maintained. How the parks stay clean and pleasant and unbothered, while the Kims and the Gunseis of the city absorb everything that keeps that cleanliness possible. The next part of this film's argument is about something much more personal than architecture and basements. It is about a smell and a man overhearing something he was never supposed to hear. And the exact moment when a person realizes that no matter what he does or how hard he works, there is something about him that will always give him away. Section 3. The smell. There is a scene in Parasite that happens under a table. The Parks have come home early from their camping trip because of the rain. The Kims, who have been living it up in the park house while the family was away, have barely managed to hide themselves. Keytek is under the coffee table in the living room. Mr. and Mrs. Park are on the couch directly above him, close enough that Keytek could reach up and touch the cushion Mr. Park is sitting on. The Parks do not know anyone is there. They are talking the way people talk when they believe they are completely alone. And then, Mr. Park starts talking about Keytek's smell. He does not know Keytek is underneath him. He is just telling his wife what he has noticed over time, in the casual way that people share observations they would never say to someone's face. He says Keytek smells like someone who rides the subway. He says it in a tone that makes clear this is not a compliment. Not an attack either, just an observation. The kind of thing you say when you are certain the person you are describing cannot hear you. Keytek hears every word. He stays completely still under the table. He does not move. He does not make a sound. He lies there and listens to his employer describe his smell to his wife. And the camera stays on Keytek's face long enough to show what this does to a person. There is no single emotion on his face. There is something more complicated and harder to name. The look of a man who has just had something confirmed that he already suspected, but had been working very hard not to think about directly. This scene is where the film shifts. Everything before it is about the Kims trying to move up. Everything after it is about what it costs to try. Bong talked about the smell in interviews with very specific language. He said that normally, in real life, it is not easy for poor people to get physically close to rich people. There is always a first class and an economy class, always a division. But in this film, he said, they are very close enough to smell each other. He said the smell was designed to show the moments when the basic respect one human being has for another gets destroyed. He said smell reflects your life. It shows what kind of work you do, whether you are struggling, what spaces you live in. And then he said something that explains exactly why the scene under the table is staged the way it is. He said that even when you notice the smell of someone else, you do not say it out loud, because it would be rude. In Parasite, they say it, and the person it is about hears it, whether or not it was meant for him to hear. And that is the moment, Bong said, when the final pieces of self-worth get destroyed. The smell Ki-tek carries is not body odor in the way most people imagine when the word comes up. The film is careful about this. Multiple characters in the Kim circle are described as sharing the same smell. Ki-tek, Ki-woo, Ki-jung. They all have it. Mr. Park describes it at different points as smelling like an old radish, like a boiled rag, like the subway. What he is actually describing is the smell of the banjiha, the semi-basement apartment, the damp, closed-in air of a space that does not get enough sunlight or ventilation, that sits below street level and collects moisture, and the particular quality of air that comes from living in a space that was never designed for living. The Kims all carry it, because they all come from the same place, and no amount of effort or presentation removes it completely. It seeps into clothes and skin and hair in a way that personal hygiene alone cannot fix. This is where the film makes a move that most class stories do not make. Most stories about rich people and poor people treat the markers of class as things that can theoretically be overcome with enough effort. The right clothes, the right accent, the right education. Parasite is interested in the markers that cannot be managed away. The smell is not something Ki-tek can fix by working harder or presenting himself better. He can wash. He can dress well. He can perform competence and professionalism in every interaction. And he does. He is a good driver. He is reliable. He does not overstep. Mr. Park even tells him directly that he appreciates this about him. But the smell travels with him from the place where he lives, and the place where he lives is underground. And underground is where the system has put him. And he cannot change where the system has put him by the time any single workday begins. The scene under the table is the moment Ki-tek understands this. He already knew it, in the way that people who live inside a system always know the rules of it, even when nobody states them plainly. But knowing something, and hearing it spoken out loud by the person whose opinion of you determines your income, are two very different experiences. One is a suspicion you can push to the back of your mind. The other sits in you permanently. The smell comes back at the birthday party. Gunse has just emerged from the basement and stabbed Ki-jung and collapsed. The garden party has turned into chaos. People are screaming. Ki-jung is bleeding on the grass. And Mr. Park, in the middle of all of this, reacts to the smell coming off Gunse with visible physical disgust. He wrinkles his face. He pulls back. He is standing in the middle of a scene of violence and injury, and his dominant reaction is to the smell of the man on the ground. Ki-tek watches this. Ki-tek is standing a few feet away, tending to his daughter who has just been stabbed. He sees Mr. Park's face at the moment of the smell. He sees the same involuntary recoil that he lay under a table and listened to weeks earlier. And something in Kitak reaches its end. He picks up the knife. He kills Mr. Park. The film does not give a speech at this moment. Kitak does not explain himself. There is no monologue about dignity or injustice or the years of accumulated smallness that have led to this point. He just does it and runs. And the audience, having watched everything that built to this moment, understands it completely without being told what to feel. Bong structured the smell as the spine of Kitek's story deliberately. In one of his interviews, he described the smell as what happens when two classes are forced into physical proximity in a way that normal social arrangements prevent. He was pointing at something real. The economy of a city like Seoul depends on people like the Kims being close enough to the parks to drive them, clean their house, cook for them, tutor their children. That closeness is required. But the social and psychological distance that keeps the class structure stable also requires that this closeness stay managed, bounded, kept within invisible lines. The smell is what crosses those lines without permission. It is involuntary. It is physical. It does not obey the agreement that keeps everything polite and functional. Mr. Park does not think of himself as someone who looks down on poor people. He is polite to Kitek. He pays him fairly. He appreciates that Kitek does his job well and does not make things uncomfortable. But the smell gets through anyway. And the way he talks about it to his wife, with that casual, private honesty that people reserve for moments they think are unobserved, reveals what lives underneath the politeness. Not hatred, not cruelty. Something more ordinary and in some ways more difficult. Simple, automatic. Unexamined disgust. The distinction the film is drawing here is between what people perform and what they actually feel. The Parks perform niceness. They are genuinely nice in many of their interactions. Mrs. Park is warm and enthusiastic, and not obviously condescending. Mr. Park is professional and fair. But performance is something you maintain consciously, and the conversation on the couch is not conscious. It is a man and his wife alone in their house saying what they actually think. And what he actually thinks is that his driver smells like the subway. And this is said with a specific tone of distance that has nothing to do with the specific man and everything to do with the category that man represents. Kitek is a category to Mr. Park, a useful one, an appreciated one, a category he would describe positively if asked, but still a category. And the distance between being a person and being a category is exactly the distance that the smell makes visible. There is a line spoken by Kitek's wife, Chung-suk, that says more about the class structure in this film than almost anything else. She says about Mrs. Park, "She is not rich, but nice. She is nice because she is rich." The point she is making is that being nice costs something. Maintaining warmth and openness and generosity requires a certain amount of security. When you are not worried about your rent, when your children are fed, when your house is not going to flood and your job is not dependent on someone else's mood, being pleasant is relatively easy. The Kims cannot always afford to be nice. They have to be calculating. They have to be strategic. They have to make decisions about people that they do not have the luxury of making out of pure warmth. The niceness of the Parks is real, but the conditions that make it possible are not available to everyone. This feeds directly into why Mr. Park's reaction to the smell is so precise as a piece of filmmaking. He is not evil. He is a man whose comfort is so total that the involuntary physical presence of poverty, arriving on a gust of air from the man he employs, strikes him as something unpleasant that has wandered into his life from somewhere else. He has the luxury of experiencing the lives of people like Kitek only in small, manageable, professionally bounded doses. The smell is the dose that gets through the boundary without being invited. And the fact that it disgusts him is not a personal failing. It is a class position. It is what happens when the distance between two groups of people is wide enough and consistent enough that the physical reality of one group registers to the other as foreign and unwelcome. The academic work on this aspect of the film is extensive. One paper published in the Economic and Political Weekly argued that most analyses of Parasite got the central mechanism of the film wrong because they focused on the class imagery and missed that the film actually turns on the body, on the physical reality of smell as a force that crosses the boundaries that social arrangements try to maintain. The smell is transgressive, the paper argued, not because it is offensive, but because it refuses to obey the invisible agreements that keep the rich and poor from having to fully register each other as equally real. The smell makes Kitek real to Mr. Park in a way he did not consent to and does not welcome. That is the thing the film is showing, not that Mr. Park is a bad person. That the system produces this. That when you organize a city so that one group of people lives underground and another group lives on the hill, and the underground group exists primarily to service the needs of the hill group, the moments when the reality of the underground breaks through the managed surface of that arrangement are experienced not as information, but as intrusion. Kitek lying under the table is the whole film in miniature. A man in the dark, directly beneath the person whose world he supports. Listening to himself being described as something that does not quite belong in the space above him. Staying perfectly still, not making a sound. Doing the thing that people in his position learn to do, which is to absorb the weight of being seen that way and keep going, because stopping is not an option. Until one day, at a birthday party, it is. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the film has not yet accounted for is how both families got to where they are. The smell and the stairs and the basement tell you what the gap looks like. The next section is about how the gap was built, and specifically about the one institution in South Korean society that was supposed to close it, and instead made it wider. Section 4. The fake degree and the real system. Ki-woo gets into the Park house with a forged document. His friend Min-hyuk is leaving for university and needs someone to take over his tutoring job with Park Da-hae, the Park's teenage daughter. Min-hyuk recommends Ki-woo for the position. The problem is that Ki-woo has not passed his university entrance exam. He has taken it 4 times and failed to get in. He does not have the credentials the job technically requires. So Ki-jung, his sister, forges a university document. She makes one that looks real. Ki-woo walks into the Park house carrying a fake piece of paper that says he is something he is not, and the Parks never question it, and he gets the job. Most readings of this moment treat it as the beginning of the con, the first deception, the spark that lights the whole scheme. And it is all of those things, but the more precise question is why a forged university document works so cleanly in this world. Why the Parks accept it without verification. Why the piece of paper carries so much weight that simply having one, real or fake, is enough to get a foot in the door of a household like theirs. The answer to that question is not about the Parks specifically. It is about what South Korean society decided education means and what it costs, and who it was actually built to serve. South Korea has one of the most intense education systems in the world. This is documented, measurable, and not disputed. The country went from extreme poverty after the Korean War in the 1950s to becoming one of the wealthiest nations on earth within a single generation. A huge part of how it did this was by building an education system that produced a massive, highly trained workforce very quickly. School became the path. University became the gate. The university entrance exam became the single most important moment in a young person's life. A test taken once a year that determines which university a student gets into, and therefore, in the logic of Korean society, what kind of life they will have. The exam is called the sunung. Students prepare for it for years. The pressure is so severe and so widely documented that on the days the exam takes place, the South Korean government has adjusted flight schedules to reduce noise during the listening portions. Stock markets open late. Police provide rides to students who are running behind. The entire infrastructure of the country pauses to accommodate this one test, because the entire country understands, through shared agreement built over decades, that this test is the dividing line. Getting into a top university in South Korea is understood to determine not just your career, but your marriage prospects, your social circle, your status in every room you walk into for the rest of your life. The top 3 universities, known as Sky Universities, Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, carry a weight in Korean society that is hard to convey to someone outside it. Getting into one of them changes what you are. Not getting into one of them follows you. The private tutoring industry exists because of this pressure, and the private tutoring industry in South Korea is one of the largest and most documented examples of education becoming a market that benefits the people who already have money. The institutions are called hagwons. They are private tutoring academies. Students attend them after school to get additional preparation for the sunung and for university applications generally. In 1979, around 6% of South Korean school-age students attended hagwons. By 1997, that number was 59%. By 2008, it was 75%. Total annual spending on hagwons across the country reached an estimated 36 trillion won by 2012. These are not small numbers attached to a fringe activity. 3/4 of the country's school-age children were attending private, paid tutoring on top of their regular schooling. And families were spending the equivalent of tens of billions of dollars a year to make this happen. The families who could spend more got more. A hagwon in a wealthy neighborhood costs more and typically produces better results because it can attract better teachers, offer smaller class sizes, and provide more hours of instruction. Rich students arrived at the sunung having had years of expensive supplemental preparation. Poor students arrived having had whatever their school provided, plus whatever their family could afford, which for many families was very little or nothing at all. Ki-woo has failed the university entrance exam 4 times. He is clearly intelligent. The film goes out of its way to show this. He is quick, perceptive, socially adept, and good at reading situations and people. He learns fast. He adapts. He is exactly the kind of person who, with the right preparation and resources, would likely have passed the exam. He has had 4 attempts and 4 failures, and the film does not present this as evidence that he is not smart enough. It presents it alongside the information that his family lives in a semi-basement and folds pizza boxes for income. The connection is left for the audience to make, and it is not a difficult one to make. Min Hyuk, who is handing off the tutoring job, is at university. He can tutor Dahae in a legitimate capacity because he has the document that says he is qualified. He got the document because he passed the exam. He passed the exam because he had the preparation. He had the preparation because his family could afford it. The chain is not complicated. It is just rarely stated plainly. Ki-woo forges the document. He presents himself as something the system says he should be, but that the system simultaneously made it harder for him to actually become. And it works. The Parks hire him. He is good at the job. He tutors Da-hae effectively. The only thing that was actually missing was the piece of paper. And the piece of paper was missing because the path to getting a real one was built in a way that made it more accessible to people who were already comfortable. The Cambridge economist Ha Jun Chang, who gave a lecture at the London School of Economics specifically analyzing the political and economic conditions depicted in Parasite, made this point directly. He argued that what makes university candidates stand out in South Korea are extracurricular activities and expensive private tutoring for the entrance exam, which poor families simply cannot afford. Poor families like the Kims become part of the system that benefits the rich rather than being served by it. Ki-woo tutors Da-hae. He provides the preparation that the Parks can afford to purchase, and that a family in a banjiha cannot afford to purchase for their own children. He is the resource. His labor goes toward maintaining the advantage of a family that already has every advantage. The forged document is funny in the film. It is presented as a caper, a clever move, something the audience roots for because the Kims are who the film wants the audience to follow. But the forgery only looks like a cheat if the system being cheated is fair. And the film has already shown, through the detail of 4 failed exam attempts and a family living underground, that the system being cheated is not particularly fair to begin with. Mrs. Park does not verify Ki-woo's credentials. She trusts him because Min Hyuk recommended him, because he presents well, because he uses the right language and carries himself in the right way, and knows enough about the things he is supposed to know about to be convincing. She trusts the performance. And the performance works because Ki-woo is actually capable. The document certifies a capability that genuinely exists. The only thing fake about it is the institutional stamp. This is where the film gets uncomfortable in a way that goes beyond the immediate story. Because what Ki-woo is doing, performing a credential he does not officially have in order to access an opportunity he could actually handle, is something the education system itself essentially forced him into. He needed a piece of paper. The piece of paper was behind a gate. The gate was guarded by a test. The test required preparation. The preparation cost money he did not have. He went around the gate. And in going around the gate, he performed competently in a job that he was, by any measure other than the institutional one, genuinely qualified for. The system that the forged document exposes is not just South Korean. South Korea is an extreme version of something that exists in varying degrees across every country that organizes opportunity around educational credentials. The credential becomes the thing, rather than the capability it is supposed to represent. And once the credential becomes the thing, it can be accumulated by the people with the resources to accumulate it, regardless of whether their capability actually surpasses that of the people who could not afford the path to the credential. A survey conducted in South Korea in 2019, the same year Parasite was released, found that among young South Koreans, 89.3% of women and 81.7% of men agreed with the statement that people born into poverty can never compete with people born into wealth. Not a small number holding a pessimistic opinion. Nearly 9 out of 10 young women in one of the world's wealthiest and most education-obsessed countries had concluded that the system was not actually open. That birth position was more determinative than effort or ability. Ki-woo's 4 failed exam attempts, and his decision to forge a document exist inside that statistic. He did not stop trying because he was lazy or indifferent. He tried 4 times. He failed 4 times. And then his friend offered him a way in through a side door, and he took it because the front door had been shut in his face 4 times, and there was no particular reason to believe a 5th attempt would produce a different result. The Parks, for their part, participate in the system without thinking about it critically because there is no pressure on them to do so. They hire a tutor for Dahe because tutoring is what families in their position do. They want Dahe to have the best possible preparation for her university applications. This is not malicious. It is what parents do when they can afford to do it, and when the system rewards doing it. They are not engineering Ki-woo's failure by hiring a tutor for their daughter. They are simply using a resource available to them. The fact that using that resource contributes to a system that produces Ki-woo's failure is not something they are required to think about, and so they do not think about it. This is the architecture of the education story in Parasite. Nobody is trying to keep Ki-woo out. Nobody in the film sits down and decides that this particular young man from a semi-basement apartment should be denied access to opportunity. The system just works in a way that makes access easier for some people than for others. And the people for whom it is easier cannot see the structural advantage, because from the inside, it feels like effort and merit. And the people for whom it is harder can see it very clearly, but lack the power to change it. So they do what Ki-woo does. They find the side door. They forge the document. They perform the credential, because the credential was always a performance to begin with. A signal that a person had the right background and the right resources and the right access. And Ki-woo had all of the underlying capability, with none of the signal. The scholar's stone that Min-hyuk gives Ki-woo on the same day he hands over the tutoring job carries a weight that connects directly to this. The stone is a susok, a traditional Korean object associated with the Joseon dynasty aristocratic class. The scholars of that era, the ones who held power and status, kept these stones on their desks as signs of their position. The stone is a symbol of old class structure handed to a young man who is trying to forge his way into a new one, and he carries it with him as though it might actually help. He calls it metaphorical when he receives it. He is right, though not in the way he means. The stone is a symbol of a class position that was never earned through personal merit in the first place, handed down through bloodlines and inherited through birth. Passing it to Ki-woo as a good luck charm for upward mobility is a joke the film is making at the level of history. The fake degree got Ki-woo through the door, but the door was built in a way that should not have required forgery. And the stone that was supposed to bring wealth ends the film, buried at the bottom of a river, while Ki-woo still lives underground with his mother. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The question the film has been circling since Ki-woo first walked up those stairs is whether the door was ever actually open at all, or whether the appearance of openness was itself the mechanism. The next section is about the people who live on the other side of that door, and what their kindness actually costs the people it is directed at. Section 5. Nice because they're rich. Mrs. Park is one of the most dangerous characters in the film. Not because she is mean, not because she schemes or plots or deliberately hurts anyone. She is dangerous precisely because she is so genuinely, completely, unguardedly nice. She is warm with Ki-woo from the first meeting. She is enthusiastic about Ki-jong's art therapy sessions with her son. She is trusting to a degree that borders on reckless, hiring people on personal recommendations without checking their backgrounds, extending goodwill in every direction, operating from a baseline assumption that the world around her is safe and the people in it are who they say they are. She is nice because she is rich. That is the line Chung-suk delivers about her, and it is the most economically precise sentence in the entire film. She is not rich but nice. She is nice because she is rich. The distinction matters. Being nice is not the same as being kind. Kindness requires actually seeing the person in front of you, registering their situation, and choosing to respond to it with care. Niceness is a social manner, a way of moving through interactions that keeps everything pleasant and functional and unthreatening. Niceness, when it comes from a position of complete security, does not cost anything. Mrs. Park does not have to be strategic about who she trusts or how she extends herself, because the consequences of being wrong are manageable for her. If a tutor turns out to be underqualified, she hires a different one. If a housekeeper does not work out, she finds another. The margin for error in her life is wide enough that generosity feels natural, because generosity has never cost her anything she could not replace. For the Kims, every decision carries weight. Every resource is finite. Every interaction with the Parks is a calculation, because there is no margin. Getting it wrong does not mean minor inconvenience. Getting it wrong means going back to folding pizza boxes in a flooding apartment. Bong designed Mrs. Park this way deliberately. He could have made the rich family cold, or arrogant, or obviously difficult. Many films about class inequality do exactly this, because it makes the moral math simple. Cruel rich people and sympathetic poor people produce a story where the audience knows who to root for and why. Parasite refuses this arrangement entirely. The Parks are likable. The audience can see why the Kims want to work for them. They pay well, they are pleasant to be around. They do not make the daily work humiliating in the obvious ways. And yet the system that produces the Parks' niceness is exactly the same system that produces the Kims' desperation. And the film makes sure both of these things are true at the same time. Mrs. Park operates from naivete that is inseparable from her wealth. She does not understand how the household runs because she has never had to understand it. When the housekeeper, Moon Gwang, is let go, Mrs. Park is genuinely lost without her. Mr. Park observes at one point that without the housekeeper, the house would be a mess within a week. Mrs. Park cannot cook. She cannot manage the logistics of the household. She relies entirely on the labor of people she employs to keep her domestic life functioning, and her relationship to that labor is essentially invisible to her. She knows the housekeeper's name. She is friendly toward her. But she does not understand what the housekeeper actually does or what it would mean to do it herself, because she has never had to. This is not a personal failing. It is what a life with sufficient money produces. When you can pay someone to handle something, you stop learning how to handle it yourself. Over time, the knowledge that comes from doing those things disappears. Mrs. Park's warmth toward the people who work for her is real, and her dependence on them is total. And the combination of these two things is what the film identifies as the actual face of class in daily life. Not contempt. Warm, genuine, oblivious dependence. The way Mrs. Park interacts with Ki Jong around Da Song's art therapy sessions shows this clearly. Ki Jong is not an art therapist. She has no training. She invented the credential and the role on the spot, piggybacking on Ki Woo's position in the house. But Mrs. Park embraces her immediately and completely. She talks about Da Song as though he is a unique artistic genius whose gifts need careful nurturing. She shows Ki Jong Da Song's paintings with enormous pride. She accepts Ki Jong's responses, which are carefully calibrated to tell Mrs. Park what she wants to hear, as genuine professional assessment. There is a moment where Ki-woo looks at one of Da-song's paintings and calls it metaphorical and strong, and then quietly asks if it is a chimpanzee. Mrs. Park corrects him. It is a self-portrait. The exchange is funny, but underneath the comedy is something the film is very precise about. Da-song is a child who had a traumatic experience that his parents interpreted as evidence of supernatural sensitivity and artistic depth. The trauma, which was actually caused by seeing Gun-se emerge from the basement, got reframed by Mrs. Park into a narrative that made her son special rather than scared. And Ki-jong, understanding that her job is to confirm what Mrs. Park already believes, confirms it. The niceness of the arrangement runs in both directions. Mrs. Park is nice to Ki-jong. Ki-jong tells Mrs. Park what she wants to hear. The house runs smoothly. Everyone is pleasant. And underneath it, a child's actual fear goes unaddressed, because addressing it would require the Parks to know about the man in their basement, which would require them to know that people like Gun-se exist in the specific way they exist, which is a knowledge their life has never required them to have. Mr. Park's niceness operates differently, but comes from the same source. He is more formal than his wife, more professionally boundaried. He is the kind of person who prides himself on treating his employees well and means it. He pays fairly. He does not make unreasonable demands. He is polite in his daily interactions with Ki-taek, and the thing he values most about Ki-taek, the thing he says explicitly, is that Ki-taek does not cross the line, does not get too familiar, stays on his side of an invisible boundary that Mr. Park finds comfortable and necessary. The line Mr. Park refers to is never defined in the film. He does not have to define it. He just knows when it has been crossed, the way people who have always had the power to draw boundaries know when their boundaries are being approached. Ki-taek is a good driver because he is skilled, reliable, and keeps an appropriate distance. He knows when to be present and when to disappear. He performs the version of himself that makes Mr. Park comfortable, and he does it well enough that Mr. Park thinks of him positively. What Mr. Park does not think about is what that performance costs Ki-taek. The continuous management of his own presence, the constant calibration of how much of himself to show and how much to suppress. The work of staying on the correct side of a line he was never shown but is always aware of. This labor is invisible to Mr. Park. It is not in the job description. It does not show up in the pay. It is simply the additional thing that people in Ki-taek's position do in order to remain employable in households like the Parks. And it runs continuously beneath every interaction. The birthday party sequence shows what happens when the performance becomes impossible to maintain. The garden party is a perfect image of Park-style niceness in full operation. Mrs. Park has organized a beautiful outdoor celebration for Da-song. There is good food, a tent, guests, the kind of effortless abundance that comes from being able to pick up a phone and arrange things without worrying about what any of it costs. The elder Kims are working the party, serving and managing. The younger Kims have been invited as guests. Mrs. Park extended this invitation warmly, without thinking through what it means to have your employee's family present simultaneously as guests and as workers, without registering that this arrangement places Ki-woo and Ki-jong in an impossible position, where they are neither fully in one category nor the other. She did not mean any harm by the invitation. She was being nice. The harm in the arrangement is structural, not intentional, which is precisely what makes it hard to address and easy to perpetuate. Then Gun-se comes upstairs, and Ki-jong is stabbed. And in the chaos that follows, Mr. Park's face does what faces do when they are not being managed. He reacts to Gun-se's smell. He pulls away. He is standing in a scene of violence and his instinct is still to register and visibly respond to the physical marker of poverty on the man who is part of that violence. He is not doing this deliberately. He is not choosing to prioritize his comfort over the seriousness of what is happening. He is simply, automatically, doing what years of living at a certain distance from a certain kind of life have conditioned him to do. Kitek watches this and kills him. The film does not ask the audience to approve of what Kitek does, but it has spent enough time building the conditions that produce the moment that disapproval feels beside the point. Mr. Park's death is not the result of a bad man receiving justice. It is the result of a system pressing down on a person for long enough that one particular moment, one expression on one face at one wrong time, becomes the thing that breaks what was left of his capacity to absorb it and keep going. After the murders, after Kitek has disappeared into the basement and the investigation has concluded, the official story that emerges is that Gunsei was a homeless man, and his motive is unknown. Kitek's motive is also recorded as unknown. The system closes around the event and produces an explanation that erases the actual conditions that caused it. The poor man killed the rich man for no apparent reason. The investigation does not look at what it would mean to work for someone for months and hear your own smell discussed with casual distance, and then watch that same person recoil at another man's poverty in the middle of a crisis. The investigation is not equipped to record that as a motive, because it is not a legal category. It is a human one. The Parks are gone by the end of the film. A new family moves into the house. German, the film specifies. They bring no knowledge of what happened in the house or beneath it. They have their own life, their own relationship to the space, their own particular version of comfortable distance from the world below the garden. The house resets. The system resets. The people who were underground stay underground. And the new family living above them will probably be just as nice as the Parks were. Chung-sook's line about Mrs. Park being nice because she is rich carries one more layer that the film does not state directly, but builds carefully. If Chung-sook had all that money, she says, she would be nice too. This is not an admission of personal harshness. It is an observation about conditions. Under different conditions, she would behave differently. The niceness is a product of the circumstances, not the person. And the circumstances are not distributed equally. The Parks got the circumstances that produce niceness. The Kims got the circumstances that produce calculation. Neither family chose their starting point. The system chose it for them, and then the system watched the results and called one family pleasant and the other family criminal. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the film still has not shown fully is what the Kims themselves understood about their own situation. How clearly they could see the structure they were inside, and what their specific choices within that structure reveal about the only options the system actually left them. Section 6. The plan that never fails. The Kims are very good at what they do. This needs to be stated plainly because it is easy to watch Parasite and come away thinking of the Kim family primarily as con artists, as people whose defining characteristic is deception. That reading misses something essential. The Kims are not successful in the Park house because they are good liars. They are successful because they are genuinely competent. Ki-woo is a good tutor. Ki-jung is a sharp reader of people and situations. Chung-sook is an excellent housekeeper. Ki-tek is a reliable and skilled driver. The deception is in the credentials, not in the work. Once they are inside the house, they perform their jobs well, because they are actually capable of performing them well. The gap between what the Kims can do and what the system formally recognizes them as being allowed to do is the engine the entire film runs on. And the way they navigate that gap, collectively, as a family unit, with coordination and humor and genuine affection for each other, is one of the things the film insists the audience notice. They are not a broken family. They are not defeated or small or ashamed of themselves in their own home. They sit together, they eat together, they make each other laugh. When they are all lying on the floor of the Banjiha, celebrating Ki-woo getting the tutoring job, they are genuinely happy. The celebration is real. The family is real. What is fake is the document Ki-jong forged. And the film is very careful not to let the fakeness of the document contaminate the realness of the people. The scheme the Kims run is layered and methodical. Ki-woo gets in first as the English tutor. He identifies that Mr. Park's son, Da-song, needs an art therapist and recommends his sister, Ki-jong, using a fake name and a fabricated background. Ki-jong gets in. She identifies that the current driver needs to be removed and engineers a situation where Mr. Park discovers him in a compromising position and fires him. Ki-taek replaces him. He and Ki-jong then work together to get Moon Gwang fired by exploiting Mrs. Park's fear of illness, manufacturing evidence of a peach allergy that Moon Gwang does not actually have. Chung Suk comes in as the new housekeeper. Within a short span of time, all four Kims are employed in the Park household, each in a separate role, each maintaining the fiction that they do not know the others. The operational precision of this is remarkable. The Kims have to maintain 4 separate cover stories in a single house, coordinate with each other without being seen to coordinate, and perform their individual roles convincingly, while never letting any of their separate relationships with the Parks reveal the connections between them. They do all of this successfully for weeks, not because they are naturally deceptive people, but because they are smart, adaptable, and practiced at reading situations and figuring out how to operate within them with limited resources. This is the skill set that poverty actually builds. Not in a romantic or redemptive way, not as a consolation prize for hardship, but as a practical reality. People who live without margin develop a particular kind of perceptiveness about the people around them and the situations they are in, because the consequences of misreading things are immediate and serious. The Kims have spent their lives figuring out how to make things work with not enough, how to redirect resources not meant for them, how to read what people want and provide it. These are genuinely useful skills. In a different set of circumstances, they would be the foundation of successful careers in any number of fields. In the circumstances the film shows, they get directed into a con because the con is the only mechanism available for applying them at any real scale. The night the Parks go camping is the closest the film comes to showing the Kims in a world that actually fits them. While the Parks are away, the Kims spread out through the house. They eat the Parks' food. They drink expensive alcohol. They lie on the furniture and look at the garden and breathe the kind of air that comes with space and light. They are not destroying anything or stealing anything of lasting value. They are just existing in a place that was built for human beings to exist in comfortably, experiencing for a few hours what it feels like when the built environment around you is genuinely on your side, rather than pressing in on you from below street level. There is real joy in this sequence. The family is relaxed and funny and warm with each other. Chung Suk slides across the kitchen floor in her socks. Ki-woo and Ki-jong mess around in the garden. Ki-taek helps himself to Mr. Park's drinks and sits in the comfortable living room and is simply comfortable. The film lets this breathe. It lets the audience feel the rightness of the Kims in a space that has enough room for them, before it pulls that space away. When the Parks come home early, everything collapses in real time. The Kims have to become invisible again at speed, scrambling under tables and behind counters, holding their breath while the Parks move through the house directly above them. The contrast between the two states, the family spread out and at ease minutes earlier, now compressed and hidden and silent, is one of the most physically precise images of class in the film. The space does not belong to them. Their presence in it is always conditional, always revocable, always dependent on the continued cooperation of the people who do own it. Then they run home through the rain, and the apartment floods, and they spend the night in the gymnasium, and Ki-taek says the thing that is the film's most honest line. His son asks him what his plan is, what comes next, how they get out of this. And Ki-taek says, "You know what kind of plan never fails? No plan. No plan at all. You know why? Because life cannot be planned. Look around you. Did you think these people made a plan to sleep in the sports hall with you? But here we are now, sleeping together on the floor. So there is no need for a plan. You cannot go wrong with no plans. We do not need to make a plan for anything. It does not matter what will happen next. Even if the country gets destroyed or sold out, nobody cares." This speech is the most important thing Ki-taek says in the entire film. Not because it is wise, though it contains real wisdom. Because it is what a man sounds like after the ideology of effort has been completely used up. The ideology of effort is the belief that making plans and working hard and trying consistently will produce better outcomes over time. It is the belief that the system responds to individual action in a meaningful way, that what you do affects what happens to you in a ratio that makes sustained effort worthwhile. Ki-taek believed some version of this at some point. He ran a business. It failed. He tried again. He ran another business. It failed. He adapted. He found new work. He built a scheme inside the Park house that represented the most sustained and coordinated effort his family had ever directed toward a single goal. The scheme worked. They were all employed. They had income. They had the beginning of a foothold. And then it rained. Not because of anything the Kims did wrong, not because the plan was bad or the execution was sloppy. The rain came. The Parks came home early. The hidden housekeeper returned. The secret in the basement surfaced, and the whole structure collapsed in a single night. The flooding was not a consequence of the Kims' choices. It was weather. It was the physics of living underground in a city where the drainage system protects the upper ground first and the lower ground when there is capacity remaining. The no plan speech is what you say when you have genuinely internalized the lesson that the game you are playing does not respond to effort in the way you were told it would. Ki-taek is not giving up. He is reporting a finding. He has conducted the experiment of trying multiple times in multiple forms with real skill and real effort and real coordination. And the finding is that the outcomes are not controlled by the trying. They are controlled by forces that operate above the level at which individual effort has any purchase. This is the most radical thing the film says, and it says it through a tired man on a cot in a gymnasium, without dramatic music or a speech that signals its own importance. Ki-taek just says it to his son in the dark, and then they go to sleep. Ki-woo does not accept it, not entirely. He holds the scholar's stone while his father talks, and he listens, and he does not argue. But when he writes the letter at the end of the film, he is making a plan, a detailed one. He will earn money. He will save enough to buy the house. His father will walk up the stairs and they will be in the garden together in the sunlight. He lays it out step by step, the way a person lays out a plan that they need to believe in, because the alternative, accepting his father's no-plan conclusion, is a kind of grief that is hard to come back from at his age. The film shows this letter as a fantasy, not cruelly, not mockingly, with something closer to tenderness and sorrow. The camera shows Ki-woo imagining the reunion, the father walking up the stairs, the family together in the sunlit garden of the house they now own. And then it cuts to Ki-woo in the banjiha, the same semi-basement, his mother nearby. The scholar's stone gone, placed at the bottom of a river. The letter is real. The plan in it is a plan his father already told him does not work. And he is making it anyway, because he is young and the alternative is unbearable. And the film understands both of these things at the same time without resolving the tension between them. The Kims did not fail because they were not good enough. They were very good. They were coordinated and clever and capable, and they built something real inside an impossible situation. They failed because the situation was structured in a way that made their success dependent on variables they could not control, in a system that does not actually guarantee outcomes based on effort. Inside a city where rain flows downhill and takes everything the people at the bottom have built with it. Ki-taek's plan is no plan. Ki-woo's plan is to buy the house. Both of these responses to the same set of conditions exist in the film simultaneously, and the film does not choose between them. One is the knowledge that comes from living inside the system long enough to see it clearly. The other is the hope that comes from not yet being willing to let that knowledge be the final word. The stone is at the bottom of a river. The father is in the basement. The son is writing letters in the dark. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the film has shown across these sections is the structure of the problem. The house, the gap, the smell, the education system, the niceness, the planning and its limits. What it has not yet shown is where all of this sits inside the actual history of South Korea, and why the timing of this film, released in 2019 in a country that had gone from one of the poorest on earth to one of the richest within a single lifetime, tells you something essential about what rapid growth without equal distribution actually produces in the lives of the people it leaves behind. Section 7. Hell Joseon. South Korea in 2019 was one of the richest countries on earth. This is not a complicated fact to establish. By the time Parasite was released, South Korea had a per capita income of around $31,000. It was home to globally dominant companies. Its technology, its entertainment, its food, its cities were being exported and consumed across the world. The country had gone from a per capita income of $93 in 1962 to that $31,000 figure in less than 50 years. That transformation, from one of the poorest countries on earth to one of the wealthiest within a single human lifetime, is one of the most dramatic economic stories of the 20th century. And in 2019, the young people of that country had a name for what it felt like to live inside it. They called it Hell Joseon. Joseon was the name of the Korean dynasty that ruled the peninsula for over 500 years before Japan colonized the country in 1910. It was a rigidly hierarchical society organized around birth position, where the class you were born into determined your options, with very little room for movement. Hell Joseon is a term that young South Koreans started using in the 2000s to describe the feeling that modern South Korea had recreated that same rigid structure under a different name. That the country's extraordinary wealth had not produced anything like equal opportunity. That the class you were born into still largely determined your outcomes. That the gap between those at the top and those trying to get there had become so wide and so permanent that calling the country a place of freedom and meritocracy was a kind of collective joke that everyone was too exhausted to keep telling. The term spread through online spaces and into mainstream conversation because it gave a name to something a generation of young Koreans had been experiencing without adequate language for it. Unemployment among young people was high. The housing market in Seoul had become so expensive that buying an apartment was essentially impossible without inherited wealth or family support. The university entrance system, despite being framed as a meritocracy, had become increasingly dominated by the outcomes of private tutoring that only wealthier families could afford. The jobs that came after university, the ones that justified the years of study and the hagwon spending and the pressure of the sunung, were not evenly distributed either. The major corporations, the chaebols, the family-owned conglomerates that controlled enormous portions of the South Korean economy, hired in ways that favored particular universities and particular backgrounds. South Korea ranked as the fourth most unequal country among the wealthy nations of the OECD in 2019, behind only the United States, Mexico, and Chile. The country's Gini coefficient, which is the standard measure of income inequality on a scale from 0 to 1, where 0 means everyone earns exactly the same and 1 means one person earns everything, sat at 0.354 that year, above the OECD average, rising, getting more unequal as the years passed, rather than less. The survey taken that same year found that 89.3% of young South Korean women and 81.7% of young South Korean men agreed with the statement that people born into poverty can never compete with people born into wealth. Nearly 9 in 10 young women in one of the world's most education-focused, economically successful countries had concluded that birth position was the determining factor. That effort and ability were not enough. That the floor you started on was essentially the ceiling you would reach. Bong Joon-ho was making Parasite inside this specific moment. He was not making a film about a general, universal idea of rich people and poor people that could apply to any country at any time. He was filming South Korea in 2019, and the film is saturated with the specific texture of that place and that moment. The banjihas, the hagwons, the failed Castella shop businesses, the desperate search for Wi-Fi signals in a basement, the way the Parks live on a hill in a house with a garden, while the city below them is full of families in semi-underground apartments waiting to flood. These are not constructed symbols, they are reported conditions. The economic history that produced those conditions is one that Ha-Joon Chang, an economist at Cambridge University who gave a lecture specifically on the political economy of Parasite, laid out in careful detail. South Korea's growth from the 1960s through the 1980s was fast, and it was, by the standards of rapidly developing economies, relatively equal. The government directed growth in ways that spread the benefits reasonably broadly. Inequality was kept lower than in most comparable situations. The economy grew, and a genuine middle class emerged, and the progress felt real to the people living through it, because for many of them, it actually was real. Then came 1997. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 hit South Korea with severe force. The country went to the International Monetary Fund for emergency support, and the IMF attached conditions to that support, as it typically does. Those conditions pushed South Korea toward what economists call neoliberal reforms. Deregulation, reduced government intervention in markets, increased flexibility in labor laws, which in practice meant it became easier for companies to hire workers on temporary contracts rather than permanent ones, to reduce the security and benefits that had been part of the previous arrangement. The large family-owned conglomerates, the chaebols, that had grown under the previous system, pushed for the removal of the state constraints that the previous system had placed on them. The growth that followed was real, but the distribution of it was not. From the late 1990s onward, South Korea became progressively more unequal. The temporary worker category expanded dramatically. By the time Parasite was being made, a large portion of the South Korean workforce was in temporary or precarious employment, with limited benefits and no meaningful job security. The people most likely to be in this category were young workers entering the job market for the first time, women, and workers without connections to the major corporate employers. The Kims exist in this post-1997 landscape. Ki-taek has tried to run businesses and failed. He is not on a permanent employment contract anywhere. He folds pizza boxes for income when nothing else is available. The family lives in informal, precarious housing. They are exactly the category of worker that the post-1997 economy produced in large numbers. People with genuine capability and genuine desire to build something stable, who found that the economic terrain had shifted in ways that made stability very hard to reach and very easy to lose. The Parks exist in the same post-1997 landscape, but on the other side of it. Mr. Park runs a company. He lives in a house with a garden designed by an architect. He can afford private tutoring for his children and an art therapist and a full household staff. He is in the category that the post-1997 economy rewarded. The reforms that made things harder for people like Ki-taek made things more comfortable for people like Mr. Park. Because reduced regulation and increased labor flexibility and lower taxes on wealth accumulation generally benefit the people who already have wealth to accumulate, and the companies that already have the scale to take advantage of a more open market. Neither man created the conditions he lives in. They were handed to them by decades of policy decisions, economic shocks, and institutional choices that played out at a level far above the individual. But the film is not interested in explaining this at the level of policy. It is interested in what those conditions look and feel like when they get lived inside by real people trying to get through their days. The scholar's stone that Min Hyuk gives Ki-woo carries specific historical weight in this context. The Suseok, the traditional Korean landscape stone, was associated in the Joseon dynasty with the Yangban class, the aristocratic scholar class that held power and status across those 500 years of Korean history. These were people whose position was determined by birth, maintained by education in classical texts, and expressed through objects like the scholar's stone, which sat on their desks as a marker of their cultivation and their rank. Hell Joseon is named after that dynasty, deliberately. The people using the term are saying that what looked like a modern meritocracy has started functioning like an old aristocracy again. That the Yangban of today are the people who can afford the hagwons and the private tutors and the correct universities and the connections that flow from those universities, and that this position is increasingly inherited rather than earned. Ki-woo holds the Suseok and calls it metaphorical. He is more right than he knows. The stone is a symbol of a class system that never actually went away. It just changed its surface. The Joseon aristocracy selected its elite through mastery of classical texts and official examinations that were theoretically open, but practically dominated by those with the resources to prepare for them. The modern South Korean system selects its elite through mastery of the Sunon and university credentials that are theoretically open, but practically dominated by those with the resources to prepare for them. The mechanism is different. The structure is the same. and a young man from a semi-basement apartment, holding an ancient symbol of elite status while forging his way into a wealthy family's home, is the film's most compressed image of this continuity. The flooding sequence in the film is worth reading against this history one more time. When the rain comes and the Kim's apartment fills with sewage, and they end up in a gymnasium with hundreds of other displaced families, and then the Parks call in the morning needing help with a birthday party. What is happening at the level of economic structure is very precise. The Kims have just lost everything they had: their apartment, their belongings, the physical base of their lives. They have nowhere to go and nothing to return to. And the Parks, whose camping trip was interrupted by the same rain, need their household staff available the next morning because they are having a garden party. The same weather event that destroyed the Kims was a minor inconvenience to the Parks. The same rain that flooded a semi-basement apartment, because semi-basement apartments sit below the level where floodwater drains away, was a reason to come home from a camping trip early for a family whose home sits on a hill with proper drainage and solid foundations. Natural events in an unequal city are not experienced equally. The rain falls on everyone. Where it ends up depends on where you live. Where you live depends on what you can afford. What you can afford depends on where you started. Where you started was not your choice. And yet the Kims say yes to the birthday party. They have no choice but to say yes. Their income depends on the Parks. Their ability to eventually replace what the flood destroyed depends on continuing to earn. The system that put them underground also makes it necessary for them to keep showing up for the people who live above ground, regardless of what the underground experienced the night before. This is not a coincidence in the film's architecture. It is the point. Hell Joseon is the name the young people of South Korea gave to the feeling of living inside this. The feeling that no matter how hard you worked, or how clever you were, or how precisely you planned, the floor you were born on had a stronger pull than any ladder you could build. That the country's extraordinary surface success masked an interior structure that had calcified into something resembling the dynasty the country thought it had left behind. Bong said in an interview that we all live in the same country now, the country of capitalism. He meant that the conditions the film shows are not unique to South Korea. The specific textures are Korean. The semi-basements, the hagwons, the sunung, the chaebols, the specific history of 1997 and what came after it. But the underlying structure, the way that wealth accumulates upward and precariousness accumulates downward, and the people at the bottom are required to service the comfort of the people at the top while their own foundations flood, is not a Korean invention. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes with a unanimous jury vote. It won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, the first non-English language film ever to do so. It earned over $260 million at the global box office. These are not the numbers of a film that only spoke to Korean audiences about Korean conditions. These are the numbers of a film that showed audiences around the world something about the place they also live, told through the specific and documented reality of one city, one country, one year. Hell Joseon resonated because the hell is not geographically bounded. The Joseon is just the local name for it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the film has been building toward, across the architecture and the smell and the education system and the kindness and the planning and the history, is a question about what the people inside this structure are actually supposed to do. The Kims tried working. They tried scheming. They tried planning. And they tried giving up on planning. none of it held. And the reason none of it held connects directly to the thing the film identifies as the real mechanism of class, something more personal and more difficult than economics or policy or history, something that lives in the body and cannot be planned away. Section 8. Crossing the line. There is an invisible line in Parasite that every character is aware of and nobody ever names out loud. Mr. Park refers to it directly when he tells Ki-tek that he appreciates him because he does not cross it. He does not explain what the line is or where it sits. He does not need to. Ki-tek knows exactly where it is. He has spent his entire working life learning where lines like this sit in relation to him, because crossing them has consequences, and staying on the correct side of them is part of the unwritten job description of anyone in his position. The line is the boundary between the distance the Parks require and the closeness that the Kim's presence in the house makes physically unavoidable. It is the agreement, never spoken but always in effect, that the people who work in the house will remain categorically separate from the people who own it, regardless of how many hours a day they share the same space. The film is built around what happens when that line gets crossed. Not dramatically, not through confrontation, but through the slow accumulation of proximity that domestic work makes inevitable. The Kims are in the house every day. They drive the family, teach the children, clean the rooms, prepare the food, manage the logistics of daily life. They know the layout of the house. They know the family's routines, preferences, fears, and habits. They know more about the Park's daily life than many of the Park's actual friends do. And yet the line requires them to maintain, at all times, the posture of people who are present but not quite there, useful but not familiar, seen but not fully registered as people whose inner lives have the same weight as the inner lives of the family they serve. Pierre Bourdieu was a French thinker who spent his career studying how class operates in daily life. He grew up in a working-class family in rural France and spent decades examining the ways that class is not just about money, but about everything that money produces over time. The way people hold their bodies, the way they speak, what they find beautiful or tasteful or impressive, what they assume about how the world works and what their place in it is. He called this collection of ingrained habits and assumptions a person's habitus. The word means roughly the sum of all the dispositions a person develops through the specific conditions they grow up in. The automatic ways of being in the world that feel natural because they were absorbed so early and so completely that they stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like just how things are. The Kims and the Parks have different habituses, different automatic ways of moving through the world that were built by the different conditions they grew up in. And the film tracks the collision between these two sets of ingrained patterns with extraordinary precision. When Ki-woo first arrives at the Park house and looks around at the garden, the architect-designed space, the glass walls and the light and the carefully tended lawn, his face does something specific. He takes it in the way a person takes in something they want very badly and have never had access to. Not with envy exactly, with a kind of recognition. This is what enough looks like. This is what it feels like when the built environment around you was designed with your comfort in mind. He has never stood in a space like this before, and the film lets the audience see that in his body, in the way he moves through the garden, tentative and admiring, calibrating himself to a space he has not yet learned how to inhabit. Over the course of the film, Ki-woo gets better at inhabiting it. He learns the codes. He picks up the language that makes him readable as someone who belongs in a house like the Parks. When Mrs. Park shows him Da-song's painting, he responds in exactly the right way, using words that signal he understands what she values and can reflect it back to her. He is learning in real time how to perform the habitus of a class he was not born into. And he is good at it. The learning is fast, and the performance is convincing. But the smell is still there. The habitus can be performed at the surface level. The banjiha cannot be washed out of the skin. Bourdieu wrote about what he called cultural capital, which is the non-money version of wealth. The knowledge, the tastes, the social skills, the educational credentials, the familiarity with the objects and ideas and ways of speaking that confer status in a given society. The Parks have enormous cultural capital. They live in a house designed by a specific architect whose name carries status. They have a scholar's stone, a suseok, which is both valuable and connected to a tradition of educated Korean elite. Mrs. Park talks knowledgeably about art and child development. Mr. Park moves through his professional world with the ease of someone who has never had to wonder whether he belongs in the rooms he enters. The scholar's stone that Min-hyuk gives Ki-woo is an object of cultural capital that has arrived in a household that does not quite know how to hold it. Ki-woo's father examines it. He turns it over in his hands. There is something slightly off in how the Kim family relates to it, a small gap between the object and the people holding it that the film captures without comment. Ki-woo calls it metaphorical, reaching for the vocabulary of cultural appreciation that the suseok traditionally represents. His reach is genuine. The gap between reaching and having is what Bourdieu spent his career describing. The crossing of lines in Parasite happens in both directions, and the film tracks both with equal interest. The Kims cross upward, into the Park's space, into the Park's house, into roles and performances that place them temporarily inside the class position of people who employ household staff. They cross this line through deception, but the deception is only necessary because the line exists in the first place. If credentials and connections and class position were not the gatekeeping mechanisms for access to the kind of employment the Parks offer, the Kims would not have needed to forge anything. They would have applied on the basis of capability. They have capability. The line does not respond to capability. It responds to the right signals, the right documents, the right names dropping in the right conversations. The Kims learn to produce the right signals. This is not the same as crossing the line. The line moves with the Parks. The Parks cross downward without knowing they are crossing. When Mr. Park talks about Ki-taek's smell to his wife, he is not aware that he is reaching across a boundary. He thinks he is alone. He thinks he is in the private space, where the line does not apply because the person on the other side of it is not present. Ki-taek being under the table is the film's way of showing that the line only appears to keep the classes separate. In reality, the conditions of domestic employment mean that the person the line is supposed to separate from the private life of the family is embedded in that private life to a degree that makes true separation impossible. Ki-taek is under the table. He hears everything. The line Mr. Park is so confident he maintains is a line that only one side is actually enforcing. There is a sequence in the film where the Kims are hiding under the table and in the stairwell while the Parks move through the house above and around them. The Parks talk about their private lives, their preferences, their feelings about the camping trip and the staff and each other, completely unaware that the people they employ are within arm's reach, listening to all of it. The camera cuts between the Parks speaking freely and the Kims absorbing every word in total silence and stillness. This sequence is uncomfortable to watch because it makes the actual conditions of the relationship visible. The Parks believe they have a relationship with their employees that is boundaried and professional and appropriately distant. The Kims know, because they are living inside the actual conditions of that relationship, that the distance is a performance the parks are able to maintain because the parks control when they choose to see the people around them. When the parks choose to see Ki-tek, they see a reliable driver. When they choose not to see him, which is most of the time, he is a function, a service, something that makes their life run smoothly without requiring them to think about it. Ki-tek, who has no equivalent ability to choose when to see and when not to see, sees everything. He is always on, always calibrating, always aware of where the line is and how close to it he is standing. This asymmetry is the actual texture of class in the film, not the money difference, though the money difference is real and enormous. The difference in who has to pay attention. Moon-Gwang understood this too. She had worked in that house for years before the Kims arrived. She knew its architecture, its secrets, its rhythms. She knew about the bunker because she had been present in the house long enough and attentively enough to know everything that happened in it. Her knowledge of the secret basement was a product of exactly the kind of total, attentive presence that her work required of her. The Parks did not know their own house as well as she knew it, because she was paid to know it, and they were not required to. Her knowledge was a resource that came directly from her position as someone who had to pay attention, while the people she worked for got to choose not to. The crossing of the line that destroys everything in the film is Ki-tek's murder of Mr. Park at the birthday party. And the thing that makes it legible, that makes the audience understand it, even if they do not approve of it, is the sequence of line crossings that preceded. Mr. Park crossed a line when he talked about Ki-tek's smell to his wife in what he believed was private. He crossed it again when he reacted to Gunsei's smell at the party with visible physical disgust, while Ki-jong bled on the grass in front of him. These crossings were not conscious. Mr. Park was not trying to wound anyone. He was just moving through his feelings in the way that people move through their feelings when they are not worried about who is watching and what it costs. But Ki-tek was watching. Ki-tek is always watching. He has to be. And what he watched in those 2 moments was the confirmation that the line Mr. Park talks about with such appreciation, the line Ki-tek maintains so carefully and is praised for maintaining, is a line that protects the Parks from having to register the full humanity of the people around them, while providing no equivalent protection to those people at all. The line runs one way. The people below it are required to stay on their side of it. The people above it can say whatever they want, feel whatever they feel, react however they react. And it counts as privacy or personal preference, or just the honest expression of sensory experience. There is no equivalent privacy available to Ki-tek. His smell crosses the line without his permission. His presence in the house crosses lines without his permission. His daughter's blood on the grass crosses lines without his permission. And none of these crossings is responded to with the kind of careful management that Mr. Park applies to the boundary of his own comfort. Bourdieu argued that the social world reproduces itself not through force or explicit rules, but through the internalization of the rules by the people who are governed by them. The Kims have internalized the line. Ki-tek knows exactly where it is. He has maintained it for months with professional precision. The murder is not a failure to understand the line. It is a decision made in a fraction of a second in a garden full of chaos, that the line is not worth maintaining anymore. That the cost of continuing to stay on his side of it, of continuing to absorb the weight of being on the wrong side of every asymmetry the film has documented, has exceeded whatever the line was protecting him from. He goes into the basement afterward. He goes below the line entirely. Below the house, below the family, below the city, below everything. He sends messages upward that nobody is equipped to receive. He has crossed every line the film has been tracking and ended up in the one place where lines no longer apply, because there is nothing left above him that he is required to manage his relationship to. The film has now shown the full architecture of the problem, the physical structure of the house and the city, the hidden population in the basement, the smell that crosses class boundaries without permission, the education system that formalizes the gap, the niceness that maintains it, the futility of planning against it, the historical and economic forces that built it, and the invisible line that everyone enforces and nobody discusses. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What it is not yet shown is the one symbol that ties all of this together. The object that was supposed to bring the Kim family wealth, that a young man carried with him into the house as a kind of proof that things were changing, and that ended up being the weapon used to nearly kill him, and the thing he buried in a river when there was nothing left to hope for it. Section 9. The Stone. Min Hyuk brings the scholar stone to the Kim family's apartment on the same day he tells Ki-woo about the tutoring job. He carries it in like a gift, which is what it is, wrapped in the casual generosity of someone who has enough that giving things away does not register as a loss. The stone is heavy. It is a suseok, a traditional Korean landscape rock, the kind that has been collected and admired in East Asia for centuries. Min Hyuk's grandfather owned it. It has passed through the family. Now Min Hyuk is leaving for university abroad, and he wants Ki-woo to have it because, he says, it is supposed to bring wealth and success to the household it lives in. Ki-woo holds it. He turns it over. He looks at it for a moment and then says, "It is so metaphorical." The line gets a laugh because it is slightly absurd, the way Ki-woo reaches for elevated language to describe a rock. But the film means it. The stone is metaphorical. Bong put it in the film precisely because of what it represents at every level simultaneously. As a physical object, as a cultural symbol, as a piece of history, and as the thing that eventually nearly kills the young man who was told it would save him. The suseok tradition goes back over 1,000 years in Korea and in other parts of East Asia, including Japan and China. These stones were not cut or shaped or polished by human hands. The entire point was that they were formed entirely by nature, by water and time and erosion, and then found and appreciated for the forms they had taken on their own. A true suseok was dense and hard and interesting to look at from every angle, a piece of the natural world preserved and displayed as an object of contemplation. The value of a suseok came from its age, its form, its rarity, and the history of who had owned it. During the Joseon dynasty, the 500-year Korean kingdom that the term Hell Joseon references deliberately, suseok were kept in the private study rooms of the Yongbang class. The Yongbang were the aristocratic scholar class, the people who held political power and social status across those centuries. Their studies were called sarangbang, and a suseok placed in the sarangbang was a marker of the owner's cultivation, their appreciation for natural beauty, their connection to the classical tradition of educated refinement that defined elite status in that society. Owning a fine suseok and displaying it correctly was a signal of belonging to the class that mattered. The Yongbang did not earn their position through individual effort. They were born into it. Their status was inherited through bloodlines and maintained through access to the classical education that prepared candidates for the state examinations. Examinations that were theoretically open to all, but practically dominated by people who had grown up in Yangban households with the resources and the cultural familiarity to prepare for them. The susok on the desk was not a reward for merit. It was a marker of inherited position, dressed up in the language of cultivation and taste. Min-hyuk giving this stone to Ki-woo is a gesture loaded with irony that the film does not point at directly. Min-hyuk is a university student from a comfortable family. He is leaving to study abroad. He has the kind of life that allows him to pass through Ki-woo's world with goodwill and generosity, and then continue upward on a trajectory that Ki-woo cannot easily follow. He is not malicious. He genuinely likes Ki-woo and wants good things for him. He recommends him for the tutoring job with sincerity. He gives the stone with sincerity. None of it is performed or calculated. But the stone that is supposed to bring Ki-woo wealth is a symbol of a class position that was never distributed through luck or hard work or the goodwill of friends. It was inherited. The whole point of the Suseok tradition was that these objects accumulated value through time and ownership and the prestige of the hands they had passed through. The stone Min-hyuk gives Ki-woo has value because it belonged to his grandfather. The grandfather's position gave the stone meaning, and that position, like the position of the Yangban who kept similar stones on their desks 500 years earlier, came from birth, not from effort. Handing this to a young man from a semi-basement apartment as a charm for upward mobility is the film's most concentrated image of how the mythology of meritocracy actually works. The idea that anyone can rise if they work hard enough gets passed down alongside objects and opportunities that only move in one direction. The stone stays in families like Min-hyuk's until they decide to give it to someone like Ki-woo as a parting gift, at which point it becomes both a genuine expression of affection and an accidental symbol of everything that makes the affection insufficient. Ki-woo carries the stone with him throughout the film. He brings it into the park house. He holds it in the gymnasium the night of the flood, clutching it while his father delivers the "no plan" speech. His father notices the stone in his hands and tells him to get some rest, with a look that suggests he finds something both touching and painful about his son holding onto a rock in a disaster shelter, as though it might change what happens next. Then Ki-woo takes the stone into the bunker. His stated intention in taking it down there is not entirely clear in the film. He goes into the basement with the stone after the birthday party begins, heading toward where he knows Gunsei is. The stone is heavy. It is the kind of object a person could use to hurt someone if they chose to. The film leaves ambiguous exactly what Ki-woo planned to do. What actually happens is that Gunsei, who is already in the basement and finds Ki-woo there, picks up the stone and brings it down on Ki-woo's head. Twice. Ki-woo ends up in a pool of blood at the entrance to the bunker. The stone that was supposed to bring his family wealth used to split open the skull of the young man who carried it in as a symbol of hope. The stone nearly kills him. He survives with brain damage severe enough to require surgery. And at the end of the film, in the final sequence where Ki-woo writes his letter to his father and imagines the reunion that the letter describes, there is a brief image of him placing the stone in a river. Not throwing it with anger, just setting it down in the water and letting the current take it. The Suseok tradition holds that these stones should not be artificially shaped or altered. They are formed by nature, specifically by water moving over them across enormous spans of time. Returning the stone to a river is, in the logic of the tradition, returning it to the process that gives such stones their meaning. It is also, in the logic of the film, releasing the last object that Ki-woo had been holding on to as a physical representation of the belief that things might change. The stone goes back to the water. The letter stays. The fantasy of buying the house and walking his father up the stairs stays. But the object is gone. Bong designed the stone to carry meaning at every point in the film where it appears, and the meaning shifts each time based on who is holding it and what is happening around it. When Min Hyuk first brings it, it is a gift, a lucky charm, a symbol of goodwill between two young men of different economic positions. Its presence in this first scene establishes the friendship between Ki-woo and Min Hyuk as genuine, while quietly marking the gap between them. Min Hyuk can give away a valuable heirloom because he lives in a world of enough. Ki-woo receives it with something approaching reverence because he does not. When Ki-woo carries it around through the middle sections of the film, it is aspiration made physical. A heavy, solid, real thing he can hold that represents the idea that his family's situation is about to change, that the tutoring job is the beginning of something, that the stone's traditional promise of wealth and success is going to deliver what the tradition says it delivers. When his father examines it in the Kim apartment, turning it over with the slight uncertainty of a man handling an object from a world he does not quite belong to, it is the gap between cultural familiarity and cultural performance. The Kims can hold the stone. They cannot hold the history that gives it meaning. That history belongs to people like Min Hyuk's grandfather, and it cannot be transferred along with the object. When Ki-woo clutches it in the gymnasium, while his father tells him plans never work, it is the last physical object of hope in a night that has destroyed everything else. His father's words are going into him, and the stone is what he holds against them, the concrete weight of an object that was supposed to mean something good. When it is used to bludgeon him in the basement, it is the film's most complete image of what happens to the aspirations of people in Ki-woo's position. The tool of upward mobility turned into a weapon against the person who was trying to use it. The lucky charm delivering the opposite of luck, with the same blunt physical force that luck and its absence always carry. The stone that was supposed to lift him, ending him up in a pool of blood at the entrance to an underground bunker. And when he puts it in the river at the end, it is release, not resolution. The river does not fix what happened. Ki-taek is still in the basement. Ki-jung is dead. Ki-woo has brain damage and lives in a semi-basement with his mother. The stone being in the river does not change any of this. But the stone being in the river means Ki-woo is no longer carrying the weight of what it promised. He is no longer holding an object that told him wealth and success were on their way. He is writing a letter instead, which is its own kind of hope, a less physical and more private one. A hope that does not require an object to make it real. The scholar's stone thread in Parasite is also a thread about the difference between symbols and the things they stand for. The susok is a symbol of wealth and status. Owning it is not the same as having the conditions that produce wealth and status. Ki-woo receives the symbol. He never receives the conditions. The stone passes from a family that had both the symbol and the conditions to a young man who has neither. And the transfer of the symbol does not transfer the conditions. Symbols are portable. The material reality they represent is not. This is true of the university document Ki-jung forges as well. The document is a symbol of educational achievement. Ki-woo has the underlying capability the document is supposed to represent. What he lacks is the institutional stamp, the piece of paper that signals to people like the Parks that his capability has been processed and approved by the correct system. Ki-jung makes the symbol without the system behind it. Exactly the way Min Hyuk gives the susok, without the family history and accumulated position behind it. In both cases, the symbol arrives in Ki-woo's hands, and in both cases, the conditions that make the symbol meaningful do not arrive with it. The stone is also the film's running joke about the word metaphorical. Ki-woo says it is so metaphorical when he receives it. The film then makes it metaphorical in every way possible, running the object through every major turn of the story, accumulating meaning on it until it has become almost too loaded to look at directly. And then it puts the stone in the river and steps back, and the last image of it is not heavy with accumulated symbolism. It is just a rock in water, being shaped by current, becoming, over time, the kind of thing that someone might pick up and call beautiful, and give to a young man as a token of hope. The circle is quiet, and it does not feel like resolution, because the film does not offer resolution. It offers accuracy. The stone goes back to the river. The family stays where it is. The house on the hill gets new occupants who know nothing about what happened in it. And the question the film has been building toward from the first frame, the question underneath all the symbolism and the architecture and the smell and the history and the line that runs one way, is the question that the next section addresses directly. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Whether any of this was ever going to end differently, whether the system the film documented so carefully produces the outcome it produced because the people in it made specific choices that could have gone another way, or whether the outcome was baked into the structure from the beginning and the specific choices were just the particular shape that an inevitable result took on its way to arriving. Section 10. No villains. The most uncomfortable thing about Parasite is that there is nobody to blame. This is not an accident. Bong said it directly in an interview with Empire magazine. There are no true villains in this film. Every character has qualities that make them sympathetic, and qualities that make them hard to fully defend. The Kims deceive people. The Parks exploit labor without thinking about it. Moon Guang hides a man in someone else's basement. Gun Se worships a man who does not know he exists, and then erupts into violence at a children's birthday party. Ki-tek murders someone. Nobody in this film is clean. And nobody in this film is purely guilty either. This is the design choice that separates Parasite from most films about class inequality, and it is the choice that makes the film's argument more honest and more difficult than the argument most films in this territory are willing to make. The easy version of this story has a clear moral structure. Rich people are cold and greedy and deliberately keep poor people down. Poor people are warm and deserving and would thrive if only the system were fairer. The audience knows who to root for and what the film thinks, and everyone goes home with their existing beliefs confirmed. Bong was not interested in making that film. He was interested in making a film about how the system actually works, and the way the system actually works does not produce clean moral categories. It produces people whose behavior makes sense given their conditions, across every level of the structure, and whose conditions were not chosen by them. The Parks are not deliberately cruel. The film is emphatic about this. Mr. Park is professional and fair. Mrs. Park is warm and trusting. They pay their staff on time. They do not make the work degrading in obvious ways. When Mr. Park talks about appreciating Ki-tek for not crossing the line, he means it genuinely. He has good feelings toward his driver. He simply has those good feelings at a distance that keeps him from having to think about what Ki-tek's life actually looks like outside the car. This distance is not personal coldness. It is structural. The Parks live in a world that does not require them to see the full reality of the people who make their comfort possible. Their house is designed to keep the working parts of domestic life invisible. The kitchen is separate from the living spaces. The staff entrance is different from the family entrance. The architect who designed the house built it to produce a certain kind of life. And that life includes the seamless invisibility of the labor that sustains it. The parks are not hiding from this truth. They simply live in a space that was built to make that truth easy not to think about. The Kims are not simply victims either. They displace Moon Guang from her job, using a calculated lie about a peach allergy. They leave Gun-se tied up in a basement as the rain comes down and the situation deteriorates. And they do not do this out of evil, but out of the very understandable priority of their own survival. They have their own cruelties, their own willingness to use other people as means to their ends, their own blind spots about who sits below them in the structure. Ki-tek looking at Gun-se's living conditions and asking how anyone could live like that is a man temporarily forgetting that he lives in a semi-basement apartment that floods with sewage when it rains, applying the contempt downward that he absorbs from above. The film watches all of this without flinching and without excusing any of it. Every character gets to be fully human, which means every character gets to be complicated, which means the audience cannot settle into the comfort of simple sympathy or simple condemnation. Moon Guang is the character whose trajectory makes this most visible. She is introduced as an obstacle. The Kims need her gone, and they remove her with efficiency and without much apparent guilt. She is dismissed from a job she has held for years through a manufactured lie about a medical condition. And then she comes back, not as a villain seeking revenge, but as a desperate woman trying to keep her husband alive. And the film shows her desperation with enough detail that her behavior becomes completely understandable. She did not start out as the Kims' enemy. She became one because the Kims needed her position more than she could afford to hold on to it. And both of these things were true simultaneously. Bong noted in the same Empire interview that he considered Moon Guang to have done nothing genuinely wrong, apart from hiding her husband in the park basement. And even that is a decision made under conditions of extreme desperation. Her husband had nowhere to go. She had access to a space where he could survive. She used it. The parks never knew. The system of obligations and debts and loan sharks that produced Gun-se's need to hide was not created by Moon Guang. She was managing the wreckage of a collapse that happened to someone she loved, using the only resource she had access to. The Kims, in removing her from the house, did not cause Gun-se's situation, but they did remove the one person who was keeping it from becoming catastrophic. Gun-se worshipping Mr. Park from the basement is one of the film's most discussed images, and the discussion usually focuses on how sad, or strange, or pathetic it appears. But the film does not present it as pathetic. It presents it as logical. Gun-se has been underground for 4.5 years. The only connection he has to the world above him is through Moon Guang, and through the sounds and vibrations of the family moving around in the house. Mr. Park represents warmth and light and safety in the most literal possible way. The man whose house provides the only shelter Gun-se has, whose kitchen provides the food Gun-se survives on, whose presence above the basement means the basement will continue to exist and remain accessible, is experienced by Gun-se as something close to a provider. The worship is not ideological. It is the psychological result of years of total dependency on the physical conditions that one man's ownership of a house makes possible. Mr. Park would be horrified by this. He would find it deeply uncomfortable to know that a man he has never met has been living in his basement for years, treating his photograph as a sacred object. This discomfort would be genuine, and it would also be beside the point, because the discomfort is a personal reaction to a situation that is the direct product of structural conditions that Mr. Park participates in and benefits from without being required to think about. His house has a basement because an architect built it there. The basement became a refuge because the world above it had no place for a man who had failed in a failed business, in a system that does not protect people from the consequences of economic failure. Gunce's worship of Mr. Park is the end point of a chain of causes that runs through economic policy and housing markets and debt collection practices, and the particular cruelty of a system that produces enormous wealth at the top while leaving people at the bottom with no floor beneath them when things go wrong. None of this is Mr. Park's fault, in any personal or legal sense. All of it is the condition he lives inside and profits from without being required to examine. The Birthday Party Massacre is the scene where the film's refusal to produce villains becomes most difficult to hold on to, because the violence is real and the consequences are permanent, and it is hard to watch a man stab someone's father and maintain the position that nobody is to blame. Bong earns this difficulty throughout the preceding 2 hours. By the time Ki-taek kills Mr. Park, the audience has been shown in enough detail what is accumulated in Ki-taek to make the action make sense without making it right. Making sense and being right are different things, and the film insists on both of these things being true at the same time. Mr. Park is not a bad man. Ki-taek is not a bad man. The birthday party ends with one of them dead and the other one underground, and a family destroyed across both households, and nobody in the film is the villain of this outcome. The outcome is the villain. The structure that put these two men in the same garden on the same afternoon, one as the employer and one as the employee, one with a dying daughter and the other recoiling at a smell, is the thing that produced the result. Not individual malice, not personal failure. Structure. This is what makes Parasite genuinely difficult to sit with after the credits roll. Films that have clear villains offer the audience a specific kind of relief. The bad person is identified. The bad person suffers consequences. The problem is attached to a person, and the person is dealt with, and the world of the film has been made slightly safer. Parasite offers none of this. Mr. Park dies, and the problem does not die with him. A new family moves into the house. The Banjiha still exist. The Hagwon system still operates. The line between classes still runs in one direction. Ki-taek is in the basement. Ki-woo is writing letters in the dark. The system reproduces itself. This is the thing the no-villain design is in service of. If there were a villain, removing the villain would be the solution. The audience could leave the film believing that the problem is people, specific bad people who make specific bad choices, and that identifying and removing those people would produce a different outcome. Bong does not allow this. He removes the most obviously powerful person in the film, Mr. Park, and shows the audience that his removal changes nothing structurally. The house gets new occupants. The basement gets a new resident. The conditions that produce the Kims and the Gunzis of Seoul continue operating because those conditions are not located in any individual person. They are located in how the city was built and how the economy was organized and how opportunity was distributed and what protections existed for the people at the bottom when things went wrong. The Kims had a plan. The plan was good. The plan worked for a while. Then it rained. The rain is the final piece of the no-villain argument. The rain is not a villain. It is weather. It falls without preference or intention on everyone in the city. But it destroys the Kims and inconveniences the Parks, because the Kims live underground and the Parks live on a hill. And the question of who lives underground and who lives on the hill is not answered by the rain. It was answered long before the rain came, by decisions and systems and structures that operated over decades at a level far above anything any individual in the film could have changed through personal virtue or personal effort. Nobody in Parasite is the problem. The problem is the house. Not the specific house on the hill with the garden and the glass walls. The larger house. The one everyone in the film lives inside, whether they can see its walls or not. The one that was built over a long time by forces that are still operating, that put some people underground and some people on hills, and calls the arrangement natural, and then watches without apparent concern when the underground floods. The final image of the film is Ki-woo in the semi-basement writing his letter. The plan is in the letter. The hope is in the letter. The fantasy of buying the house and walking his father up the stairs into the sunlight is in the letter. And then the camera pulls back and shows the reality. The same apartment. The same ankle-level window. The same view of shoes passing by on the street above. The letter is real. The plan in it may never happen. Both of these things are true at the same time, the way all of the true things in this film exist simultaneously, without resolving into something cleaner or simpler or easier to carry home. What the film has not yet accounted for fully is the audience itself. The people who watched Parasite in 126 countries, who made it the first non-English language film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, who recognized something in a story about Seoul semi-basements and Korean private tutoring academies and a flooding apartment and a man under a table. The final question the film raises is why it traveled so far and landed so hard, in places with no banjihas, no sunum, no Hell Joseon, no specific history of 1997 financial crisis and what came after. The answer to that question is the last thing the film has to say. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.